So if we're only operating from the lower parts of our being, so from the physical mind, from the vital, from the physical body, from the unconscious, we are always going to be trapped by these particular behaviors. And the only way to free ourselves from this and to give ourselves real free will is to.
The past is really a prison. The past really imprisons us. It's like it gives us this idea that we cannot act in any other way than the way we've been acting all those years. And that's an illusion. That's not true. The past,
No.
we can break out of that prison just by making.
And that's almost what it's like trying to transform that deeper part of our being. It is that it requires you to be more stubborn and obstinate than it is.
This moment when you feel you're entering into silence, it's like a little bit of trepidation on the mind's behalf. It's like, oh my God, we now have to jump into the ocean. But if you jump in, it's like a wonderful experience.
Yeah, this is a part of our being that no one ever discusses. We all are, yes, the whole unconscious. That's a really interesting place to go and he's like, spend some time. I'm like, holy moly, people.
And today you wanted to talk about the nature of the mind.
Yes, I think people have been thinking about the mind and what the mind is and its very nature since as soon as we became self-aware and conscious to the fact that we have a mind and we are thinking. And I think it'd be really nice to look at that topic from the spiritual point of view, because there's a lot of research going on in the functioning of the brain and how the brain operates and the physical side of the experience we have of mind and consciousness. But the spiritual teachers have actually spent a lot of time looking at this topic and thinking about it and discussing it throughout time, and especially in the last 100 years. We've been very blessed to have some great spiritual teachers who really discussed it in some great detail. And I think that that's a way of looking at mind and consciousness that most people haven't come across before. So I thought that would be useful for people to be exposed to that.
Yeah. So, and what actually is the mind when we speak about the mind?
So that's a very good question. So what's interesting when you look from the point of view of the spiritual teachers, they will identify that what we understand as consciousness, which we can often call the mind as well, is really just the surface of our experience that's going on within us. So we talk about the mind, like what's on your mind? You know, have you got anything in mind for that? And it's perhaps our particular thoughts at that particular moment or the experiences we're having inside our consciousness. And we'll posit that as our mind. But that is really the surface of a very interesting and deep and complex world that we're very often not consciously aware of. And so in the last 100 years, as I said, two of the great spiritual teachers of our recent time, Sri Chinmoy and his teacher, Sri Aurobindo, talked in quite deeply and explained that beyond the surface of the mind that we experience, that there's a whole deeper reality, there's a whole different world. And that there's actually all of these different levels of experience that are going on, and they're projecting out onto the surface, and we're experiencing that as our consciousness. But that consciousness can be coming from very different places. So if we go down to the very deepest layer, we could say the physical reality. So the physical reality or our physical being can be projecting ideas and feelings onto our consciousness, and we can be experiencing those. And we'll say that that's happening in our mind, but the source of those experiences is actually something very deep and basic. And so if we start there, the nature of the physical reality is very tamasic, which means basically it's a state of consciousness that's very inert. And so the physical consciousness is the last part of us to receive light and receive transformation. So it's the most stubborn, the most obstinate.
It's very lethargic and wants to rest and sleep, and is kind of the stone consciousness in us.
It is, and it's very hard to change. And so that's the part of us that all of the problems or all of the patterns of behavior that we have that we're trying to transform, it's their refuge. So if in our mind or in our vital, we have some particular habits or we have some particular problems that keep appearing, at some point we manage to reject them or let them go, transform them in some way. But they don't immediately disappear. They simply go down one level. So if we look at how our being, spirit, like our inner being, is made up, on the base level, we have the physical consciousness. And then above that, we have the vital consciousness. So the vital consciousness has all of the desires and is the strong working of the energies within us and these habitual patterns. And then above that, we have the mind. And the mind is the part of ourselves that is closely associated with our physical mind when we talk about mind. And so the mind is the part of us that does the thinking. It is the analytical or reasoning part of our being. And then above that, we have the heart. And the heart, as we've talked about many times, is the part of our being that has the ability to identify and expand and connect with higher and more illuminating realities. And the heart is the part of our being that's most closely associated with our soul. And so what happens for us as a human being as we operate in the world, we get up in the morning and we do our spiritual practices. Let's say we'll make the best case scenario here. And when we do our spiritual practices, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the mind, the physical mind, or the mind, our experience of the mind, we're trying to make that as still and calm as possible. So we're trying to bring some real peace and quietude into the mind. And that allows us then to go beyond the mind and to connect with our own heart center. And our heart is connected with that deeper and more fulfilling part of our being. So we're spending that time bringing quietude into our mind, into our consciousness. And so then we go out into the world after we've meditated, we go into the hustle and bustle of activities. We're constantly assailed by what can be called, and what the teachers have called, thought waves from the outside world. And I really like this idea because very often when we're going about our day-to-day life, certain ideas or thoughts appear on our mind. So we start thinking about particular ideas, or we start having particular experiences, or we start having particular emotions or feelings. And we will normally not look too deeply as to where they came from. We'll think, oh, that's coming from me. That's my thoughts. It's anything that's appearing in our mind, in our consciousness, we tend to identify with as being part of ourselves. But actually, the real source for many of the thoughts we're having on a daily basis is actually from outside of us. As we go about our day-to-day activities, we interact with other people, we interact with particular locations and places. And all of these places, locations, they carry consciousness. They have these thought waves that are existing all around us. And when we're not paying attention and conscious to how we're operating in the world, we allow all of these things to come into us. And so suddenly I may be walking down the street and I may walk past someone, and that person may be in an angry or depressed consciousness, and they'll be putting thought waves into the world. I may go into an environment where the consciousness and the energy in that place is very disturbed and depressed and lacking any purity, and those thought waves can come and affect my consciousness as well. So we are all aware of that certain places and people affect our consciousness in different ways, but we often don't notice that the way that our thoughts are affected by those places and the people around us. That after talking to a certain person, we may walk away and certain types of thoughts may enter into our consciousness. And because we're not aware of the source of those, we'll think, oh, they're part of me. But in fact, we're constantly interacting with the world in ways that are unseen to us, because this is all happening below the level of conscious awareness. And so we're constantly being buffeted by the world around us, and that's creating particular thoughts, particular experiences, which we then identify with as being part of ourselves.
Yeah, very often we're just recycling thoughts of others, and it's very rare to have an original thought. So that's maybe looking into the nature of thoughts. It is many times the thoughts in our mind are maybe old thoughts that from memories, or they're things that we've picked up from friends or from the culture around us. But it's quite rare to have a real original thought. And the same is with positive or good thoughts. Like it's quite difficult for us to have really good and healthy thoughts. Like many times our mind is prone to negativity. Why is that, you think?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'll read something. Sri Chinmoy talked a little bit about the nature of the mind, and so this he was asked a question: if the mind is so bad, how can we get rid of it? And he said, we cannot categorically say that the mind is bad and we must throw it away or discard it. The mind is imperfect, but we can perfect it. The mind is darkness, but we must illumine it. The mind plays a tremendous role in our human life and society. In the Western world, the mind has come to a very high stage of development. The mind is like an elder brother. It has more wisdom than the aggressive vital and the sleeping physical. But again, when we make a comparison between the mind and the heart, we see all the limitations of the physical mind. Inside the heart is the soul. That is its special place of abode within the body. When we want to do something properly, divinely, we have to concentrate on the heart in order to contact the soul. So let us try to live inside the heart. If we can stay in the heart, we will get the capacity to identify ourselves with others who form our larger part, our larger being. In the spiritual life, we always want to identify ourselves with the vast, to make ourselves inseparably one with the vast. This is what the heart can do. The mind cannot do this. But we shall not discard the mind. We shall only try to take the mind to a proper place, and that is to the heart's illumination and the soul's illumination. When the illumination of the heart enters into the mind becomes a most powerful instrument that can be used in a divine way. The human mind is a marvelous development, but a time comes in the march of evolution when we see the limitations of the mind. The mind is necessary only until we enter into the deeper regions of spirituality. So,
Hmm,
I think that
interesting.
it's a little bit about what we're talking about here, that the mind is an imperfect instrument. And there's a really great idea that we cannot pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And have you heard this saying before?
Yes, yes, I have.
So basically, what it's saying is we cannot lift ourselves up by using our own force to lift our feet up off the ground. And so that's what a lot of people would say when we talk about trying to perfect the nature of humanity, is that human nature is imperfect. And so how can we perfect ourselves as an imperfect being? And so that's what some critics would say about the whole spiritual enterprise. How can you hope to perfect yourself? You're simply an imperfect being. But what we're trying to do, and we're trying to put forward as a different way of looking at this, is that obviously we cannot perfect our mind with our own mind, because the nature of the mind is limited, and the nature of the mind is prone to negativity and separation and depression and all of these things. But by using the deeper parts of our being, by surrendering the mind to the highest and the deepest parts of our being, and invoking the light from those higher parts of our being to come into the mind and to illuminate, we can begin to transform the mind.
Yes, exactly. And I think one of the things that Sri Chinmoy very often said about the mind, criticizing the mind, let's say, is that it's the center of division. So the mind likes to divide reality. I mean, it's a great tool because we need to divide the reality sometimes, to categorize it so that we can plan our life and we can use the mind to organize our lives. For that, it's a very useful instrument, but it's not a very good navigator through life. So it will, because of this separation, that's when problems like fear, insecurity, jealousy start. It starts with the division of the mind, and so that's why I think the limitation of the mind very much comes from this sense of separativity, right? That
Yes.
we divide, we feel divided, and the heart, on the other hand, is the part that unites. So the heart is by nature, it's very nature is to unite, to feel oneness. And this is also the salvation for these kind of problems like jealousy, insecurity, fear, is to, like you say, to go to a higher place in ourselves, the heart and the soul, where there is a natural sense of oneness and of connection,
Yeah.
right?
So it seems to me that the mind is really and it's in a midpoint between the lower unconscious part of our being, between the physical and the vital, and then in between those, and then the higher, more illumined parts of our being. And so the mind then is very interesting because the mind can go in either direction. So if the mind identifies itself fully with the vital and the physical, the mind will always be pulling us down. The mind will always be a hindrance. And for most people in the world, they've never had the opportunity to identify with the higher parts of their being. They've never had the opportunity, or maybe they've had glimpses at times of these more illumined parts of their being. But the reality that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis is much more identified with the vital and the physical than it is with the heart and the soul. And so one thing for me that's really a beautiful thing to actually start to realize is that all of these thoughts and all of these habitual patterns of behavior that we act out are all tending to come from the lower parts of our being. And it's very easy for us to be incredibly critical of ourselves and see only the darkness in us. And I think, especially when people start doing a spiritual practice, that's one of the things that we need to overcome is this identification with these lower parts of our being. Because we'll look at the way we think on a daily basis, and we'll think to ourselves, oh my God, my thoughts are so full of impurity, so full of negative emotions and feelings, so full of depression. How can I think that I can transform myself? Or how can I think that I'm worthy of having some beautiful spiritual experiences? Because all my experiences I'm having, and all the parts of my being that I know and understand, are full of darkness and full of negativity. And so that can be really disillusioning for people. And especially when you start doing a spiritual practice and you may start to have a few glimpses of these higher realities, but then you'll go out into the day-to-day world and all of the habitual patterns that come from the lower parts of our being, or the subconscious or inconscient part of the being, well, all of those things will start coming to the fore again. And then that can become really, really disillusion the spiritual seeker.
Yeah, so it's very important to go to those places where you do feel the positivity and the cheerfulness and your true divine nature, which is in the heart. So again, the importance of going there every day, just for a few minutes, to identify with that higher reality in yourself, is, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and what you mentioned there, I think is really important because we just finished our spiritual retreat in New York, and one of the beautiful things about that is you come together and you spend several weeks with other people who are attempting and aspiring to live that type of life, live a life connected with their soul, live a life coming from their connection with their heart. And you see that being surrounded by that environment and people who are living like that, it brings to the fore those parts of your being yourself. It lifts you up and allows you to spend several weeks living and operating really from that divine state of being, because you're in such a wonderful environment that you're constantly inspired to bring forward the best parts of yourself. And
Mm.
then it's only when you finish that retreat and you go back to your day-to-day life in the world and have to deal with all of the problems and the limitations that entails, that those lower parts of your being become visible again. But
Yeah.
it's having that wonderful opportunity to live in that space of consciousness for some weeks really shows you that it is possible to make your life a life fully aligned with those realities. And it's when you go back into your life, then you need to find a way to align your actions and your thoughts with those higher parts of your being again.
Yeah, exactly. And when I come back from this retreat, from the celebrations, I always take a few days to land. I always feel, when I come back, it's like I'm in a different plane of consciousness, and I feel so surrounded with peace and with inner strength. So there's a real, like, almost tangible consciousness around me that I feel like I'm almost floating on a cloud. But it's not. It's not that. It's a very powerful consciousness. And when I go to the supermarket or I interact with people, it's like, whoa, I really feel there's a, I'm coming down from quite a high consciousness, and it takes a few days, and then you kind of settle in your old life. And for me, it's like you say, when you surround yourself with like-minded souls who also have the spiritual intention, it creates such a powerful energy field that when you're immersed in this energy field, it just rubs off on you, and you just like for a few days, it just propels you into the world and gives this really powerful consciousness. And I
Yeah.
think it's also, yeah, it's part of divine grace, right? It's like for me, that is divine grace. It's like being lifted up to a higher state of being, a higher state of consciousness, where joy and happiness and peace and a truly, genuinely happy consciousness is natural, is the normal state of affairs.
Yeah, and it's a sad thing that for nearly all of us here on Earth, that is not the normal state of affairs. And I mean that's I think why there's always this feeling within us that something isn't as it should be. There's some sense of separation and there's some sense of incompleteness because we are missing this connection to that joyful, meaningful, loving state of being. And Sri Chinmoy's got that beautiful analogy that he loves to use, where he likes the analogy of a boat, and he often talks about a spiritual path, or his spiritual path in particular. He has this lovely image of a golden boat, and he says that when you're on board the boat, there's some speed and momentum that is provided by being in the boat with other seekers, with other spiritual aspirants, and it's when you're on board, then it's not all just purely your own personal effort. Because if you're trying to transform your consciousness, and it's like you're trying to row across the ocean of ignorance, and it's like if you went to the beach in Holland and you looked out and you thought, okay, right, I want to row my boat to New York City, and you started out and you rode, around the UK and out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's just such a vast journey, and it's just so hard to have your bearings and to even know, am I still going in the right direction? And storms will come, like so many things can come that will capsize your boat. But if you're in a larger vessel with many other spiritual aspirants, and that there's an experienced ship's captain who's steering and navigating the boat, he knows the way to sail the boat to the other shore. And this is one of the great analogies that Sri Chinmoy like to use of a spiritual teacher, that he is like a master navigator. He is the one who knows how to sail the boat across the sea of ignorance to the other side. And he says you're perfectly free to try and travel across by yourself. And very often in the West, we like that idea. We like that if we're going to do something, we want to do it solely all by ourselves, purely with our own efforts and with our own hard um, devotions. We're going to row that boat solo across the Atlantic Ocean. But it seems as if you were a wise person and you've never traveled across the ocean before, you're actually it's actually wisdom to take the help of someone who knows the way. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom and strength that you will actually ask someone else rather than trying to row yourself.
Yeah, and I think we're back at the limitations of the mind again, because it's this pride that we have, which comes again from the mind, that
Mm,
separates us. That we want to, it comes from the ego. We want to discover it ourselves. We only feel that it's valuable if we make all the efforts. Whereas if we just, board the big ocean liner, we'll come there much faster, and it'll be much more
yeah.
secure and safe
Yeah.
and
What is
enjoying.
what does the golden boat look like for you? Is it a giant ocean liner? Is it like a cruise ship with multiple swimming
Ah,
pools and cinemas, or
no,
is
it's
it?
more like a giant rowing boat. It's like an enormous rowing boats. We do have to row, but it's like,
Oh, good.
if we all row together, it's not that hard.
Yeah, and this is the true Calvinist in you. The Calvinist would
Yeah,
say, no, no,
I do
you
want to just
you cannot no, just relax and cruise across the ocean
no.
of ignorance. It's like you have to at least have an oar and have it in your
There
hand.
has to be some personal effort, and that
Yeah.
is again a beautiful spiritual concept that I wanted to talk about today in relation to the mind. Is the relationship between the personal effort and God's grace, or the divine grace, right? Because that is also when you talk about the mind and you talk about things like free will, which we will also discuss. It's like an interesting question, like where does the role of personal effort come in if you also have this idea of divine grace. So the
Yeah.
idea is here that if grace descends, the divine grace operates through you, uses you as an instrument, and accomplishes things. Like, for instance, when you are a runner, if you have a very good race, you can sometimes feel that some grace enters into you and you're able to run faster with that divine grace. Or you're an artist and you get some divine inspiration flows through you and you get this incredible energy to start your work of art, and you feel that you're being guided at every step. And in all, I think in all fields of life, grace can operate, even if we are making waffles or if we are selling musical instruments, grace can come in. But then the question is like, okay, if you really believe that everything is done through grace, then where is the idea of personal effort? Should you just like sit still and wait for the grace to come and not do anything? Or should there be some personal effort as well?
Yeah,
What's
so
your
so
take on
that
that?
that is one of the great spiritual questions. It's what type of surrender should we be aiming for? There's one form of surrender that is the surrender, what we can call the tamasic, or the surrender of inertia, the surrender of saying, well, if there is a divine consciousness at work here, should I just not do anything? Shouldn't I just surrender all personal effort and just do nothing and wait for that consciousness
I mean, that
to?
sounds really attractive to a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's an attractive concept, but you are correct in some ways that this universe is requiring some personal effort. It's requiring some energy to transform things. So if we make the surrender of the tamasic, the inertia surrender, we will get stuck in inertia ourselves. So our own consciousness will no longer be able to change because it needs some energy. It needs the right conditions for the grace to descend. And that I think is the right way to think about it, that you need to create the right environment to allow grace to descend into your life. You cannot just expect that you will do nothing and your mind will be full of worries and doubts, fears and anxieties and jealousy, and then expect that this divine consciousness will magically enter into you and transform all of your weaknesses into successes. that doesn't seem that doesn't seem the right approach to take. And so it seems that the right approach is to make your effort to your highest possible level. And I think really what we're trying to do when we're making an effort is, we're not sure how to transform ourselves. We don't really understand the full process of transformation of consciousness, but we have been given insight into the right type of atmosphere or environment, or state of consciousness, is the or the environment that we could create, which will allow that consciousness to enter into us. And so Sri Aurobindo often talks about bringing in some true quietude into the mind. So learning to begin to make the mind a place of still and calm is the initial right environment to allow this divine consciousness to come and enter into us. And so we can already intuitively tell that. We can tell that when our mind is completely full of thoughts, that there's no room for anything else in our mind. If we're constantly going from one worry to the next worry, one fear to the next fear, one problem to the next problem, there's no space in our mind for anything higher or more illuminating to come in and to begin to transform things. So the first step is really to begin to, through a spiritual practice, to begin to make the mind much more quiet. It doesn't need to be a silent mind, but it's beginning to reduce the number of thoughts. So if we could count the number of thoughts we have each day, and maybe we start by having 1,000 thoughts each day, and then we, over the weeks, try and bring that down to 900, and then 800 and 700. And I think people who have practiced meditation for some years will, if they could compare their state of consciousness now to what it was like when they started their practice, then would be aware that their mind is significantly more peaceful, calm, and quiet than it was when they began their journey. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a slow and steady progress, I think, when you start quieting the mind. It's not that it's all of a sudden you're there, but it's definitely over the years of meditation, you go deeper and deeper and you can start chipping away at the restlessness of the mind. It becomes more poised and more peaceful. And it's many people would would think, I think, when you talk about having no thoughts in the mind, that, whoa, what's going to happen if we have no thoughts? We cannot function. We'll become crazy.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
I think the mind thinks that as well. Like if your consciousness is completely identified with your physical mind, the mind by its very nature is a thought creation machine. It's identified itself so completely with its ability to create thoughts continuously that that's all it knows. And so if it gets the sense that you are beginning to go beyond that reality, for the mind that's a terrifying prospect, because its very nature in its own way is completely identified with the world of thinking. But we have to be really honest with ourselves. And it's, has all of the thinking we've done brought about joy, happiness, peace, serenity, any of these things in our lives?
I know the answer to that question.
You do? You've
I
looked
know
into.
it. I looked into it. It's a resounding no.
Yes. So that's the thing. Like if we were really, that's the thing, to be truly practicing a spiritual life requires real introspection, but real, you have to be very humble and very authentic with yourself and really honest.
But there's definitely a moment in meditation when you approach that state of silence that is a little bit scary when it happens for the first time. There's like, you feel something is coming, and it's like, and the mind kind of is scared, because I think the mind feels it loses its authority, it loses its existence almost.
Yeah.
And but the what actually happens is, you don't become foolish when you have no thoughts, you become wise. So it's the opposite of, it's the fear of the mind is completely unfounded. So
Yeah.
it's actually necessary to go to silence. We have had a whole episode about silence, but it's like this moment when you feel you're entering into silence, it's like a little bit of trepidation on the mind's behalf. It's like, oh my God, we now have to jump into the ocean. But if you jump in, it's like a wonderful experience. Like, oh, nothing to be afraid of here. It's all wonderful. It's peaceful, it's serene, it's quiet. And on the other hand, if you're constantly having thoughts, like, you cannot really meditate. Like, you know the feeling, if you're sitting in front of your shrine, you're trying to meditate, and just these thoughts processes are going on and on. I mean, that's not meditation. Meditation is really when the thought processes stop, or at least they are subdued. And thought is more like a dream state than the real reality. And I found a really interesting quote that Sri Chinmoy put this to music. We're singing this with the choir, with Kailash's group that I'm singing in, and it's a
Yes.
song that we are studying now. And it's a quote by a teacher of Kriya Yoga. It's a great grandson of the great Kriya master um, Lahiri Mahashai, and his great grandson, who is now alive. Whoops, excuse me. A great grandson is called Sri Shibendu Lahiri, and he said, "Thought is dream, and no thought is the drum of Shiva." I thought that was
Wow.
so poetic. No
Yeah.
thought is the drum of Shiva, the drum of Shiva. The Shiva is the transformer, is the cosmic God who is always in a state of self-forgetfulness, in deep trance. And so the drum, being a symbol of victory, is like when you reach that self-forgetfulness trance in your deep meditation, that's when thought ceases and you become something much, much bigger. You become one with your true self, with your higher self.
Yeah, and I think the question and the problem that we're talking about here is the wrong identification of self. And so if you've always identified yourself with these thought waves that are coming up from some lower part of your being and appearing in your mind, and you think that that's who you are, the cessation or the ending of those thought waves would be terrifying, because that's all you know yourself to be. And when you actually look at the the type of thoughts that you're having on a recurring basis and the types of experience you're having in your everyday mind, if you were really sincere with yourself, you would realize that they're so meaningless and pointless, because so much of it is this dull, repetitive activity. And Sri Aurobindo actually really talks about that. And he says the very nature of like the lowest physical reality is almost like dumb, inconscient repetition. And you see that that's how the world of nature works. Like certain patterns of behavior or certain patterns of action just continuously repeat over and over again. It's like the repetition of the seasons. It's the repetition of, the way that plants, the way that animals act. There's a certain repetitive nature to it that,
Now you make it seem like it's really dumb, but it's beautiful to me, this
yeah,
repetition pattern.
there is some deep wisdom in it. But if that's all you're so it's like a particular type of weed growing in your garden, and you decide that you don't want that weed. So you first of all pull that weed out. And you say, oh, great, I don't have the weed anymore. But the nature, it's a repetitive nature, because these ways of acting and these ways of being in the world are so ancient and so primordial that they will continue endlessly for very stubbornly and very resistantly to habitually do the same thing over and over
So
again.
you're saying the weed will grow back.
The weed will come back, and again you'll pull it out, and again it will come back, and again you'll pull it out. And so at some point, maybe after 1,000 times, that weed will no longer reappear. And that's almost what it's like trying to transform that deeper part of our being. It is that it requires you to be more stubborn and obstinate than it is. And this is the great saying that fate can be changed by an unchanging will. And so this comes from Sri Aurobindo, because you may have these patterns of habitual behavior. So it might be that you have this tremendous anger that continues to show up again and again. And it's almost like a mechanical, Sri Aurobindo actually talks about it as like a mechanical process. So if a certain type of stimulus or thought wave appears in your consciousness, it will stimulate this mechanical process of this anger will rise up within you. And you can see it happening. You can see it coming up. And we all have these mechanical thought or behavioral processes that we can feel within us. So it may be lust, or it may be jealousy, or it may be envy, or it may be pride, or it may be arrogance. Whatever behavior it is, we feel this being stimulated. So a particular thought wave enters into our consciousness, and that brings forward this anger. And we slowly, we know what's going to happen. We already know the whole process, because we've seen it happen 100 times before. And we see this rise of this anger within us, and we see it then express itself through ourselves. And we
And
can just,
does it end well? Does it end well?
we look, we think, why did I do that again? It's like we've done it 100 times before. But it's this recognition that this is a mechanical process that exists within us. And with the right stimulus, it will again and again come to the fore.
So you
And
can call this fate. You could call this fate, right? This is something that these patterns are part of our fate. It's like we
yes,
feel we have no control over them. They come and
yeah,
then they play out their very often destructive
yes,
consequence.
yeah.
But then
And some
fate can be changed. It's
habits,
not that,
I would say that these habits create our fate. So if we only live in the world of habitual behaviors and habitual thoughts, we are not free, because we'll get a certain type of stimulus and a certain mechanical process will come into being again. And then we'll get a certain result from that. And so that traps us within this particular type of fate. And I've talked earlier in many of our episodes about one of the great gifts that meditation gives us is it gives us a moment of space and a moment of awareness. And so very often at the beginning of this process, we have this particular thought or this particular experience that we know will trigger this particular outcome, this particular habitual behavior. And it's in those moments we can actually start to make an intervention, and we can start to turn our attention in a different direction, because all of these habitual behaviors are fed from our attention. So it's when we give our attention and our awareness over to these particular patterns of behavior that we allow them to operate. But there is a small moment there where we have the opportunity to say, no, like no longer do I identify with this behavior. I actually reject that now. This is not who I am. This is not how I'm going to operate in the world. And so there needs to become a process of when we start to no longer identify ourselves with those lower parts of our being, those lower habitual processes that act themselves out. And it's this rejection or this pushing away or this refusing to identify ourselves with these things that
Well,
I think
you're stepping out of the programming. So we have all this programming going on right inside us, and
yeah.
it's like I'm no longer subscribing to that program. I want to have something new.
Yeah, because we have to allow it in some way. And normally, unconsciously, we give our attention to it. We say, oh, yes, I know this thing. Because the thing is, very often we get some form of pleasure from it. So we know what's going to happen. And we say, just one more time, I'll let my anger play out one more time, my pride play out, my lust, whatever it is. We allow it to operate. We allow it to take over our consciousness and to act itself out. And in some way, I think we get some basic pleasure because it's something that we know. It's like some pattern that we've acted out 100 times before, and so there's some pleasure in the familiarity of this. It's like, oh yes, my old friend, jealousy. Let me act you out one more time again.
Yeah, it
If
feels so familiar.
if we were wise, at some point we would say, this has never served me well in the past. And I no longer identify with this quality or this behavior. I don't
Yeah.
want to make the same mistake forever.
Well,
And so
you can recognize pleasure by the after effects. They're always destructive. They're always negative. So the pleasure feels great in the moment. So for instance, if you just sleep very long hours in the morning, feels fantastic. You're in your bed, you're enjoying the rest. But then when you get up at 11, 12, and you feel the day is already gone, something in you pricks you. It's like your conscience saying, "Oh my God, now you've wasted your whole day." And with anything that's connected to pleasure, giving into anger, giving into jealousy, it may feel great at the moment, but the after effects are always destructive. And the other side of that is the conscious spiritual choice may be hard in the moment, but the after effects are much healthier, are much more longer lasting, and much more positive.
yeah, like if we take the action of anger, there's very often we can feel righteous, we can feel completely justified in acting out our anger. But
And
if that,
sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to.
yeah, and so
Rare occasions, I would say.
yeah, but when we act out that behavior, we're closing off all of the other potential behaviors we could have chosen.
Mm.
So when we act out anger, we could have chosen forgiveness. And if we actually thought and felt deeply like and looked at the different outcomes we would get in our life if we always chose anger or if we chose forgiveness, we would see that our life would be radically transformed through choosing the opposite of anger, through choosing forgiveness, acceptance, love, tolerance, whichever quality is the fitting one in that moment. But like you say, in the moment, there's some part of us that it gets some sort of level of pleasure from the acting out of that habitual behavior. But when we look at the after effects, we often see how destructive that was. And if we acted out forgiveness, we would actually see that we ourselves are the beneficiaries. So it's often not even about the other person or whether we're right or wrong, but it's just trying to be aware of the effect it has on our own consciousness and how we ourselves feel in the aftermath.
And it only takes one successful effort. Like you only have to do it once to see, how that we can actually do it, that we're actually capable. Because sometimes I think we feel it's not possible. The anger comes and I'm just a victim of it, or I just surrender to it. And it's too difficult to control yourself, to practice this restraint or this completely different choice. But I think it only takes once to really do it and to play it out, that you feel, oh, I can do this again. And then you create a different habit just by doing it again and again and making the right choice. Then you strengthen that part of yourself. And then after some time, it's not at all hard. It becomes your second nature, basically, to control yourself. It's not to suppress, it's not a suppression, but it is a conscious choice for, like you say, the positive side: acceptance, forgiveness, love, tolerance.
Yeah, and it's again that wrong identification. But just because we've acted in a certain way over years or millennia throughout lifetimes, we've identified ourselves as with that action, and so we think, oh well, that's who I am. That's how I act.
Yeah,
And
and I think people forget sometimes that those inclinations transition over from life to life, right? So it's not just
yeah,
the things that you've done in this life, but if we believe in reincarnation, we go back quite a few centuries or millennia. And so all these behaviors that we've been repeating in all these lifetimes they create these samskaras, these patterns of behavior that are so strong inside us, and it's not easy to conquer them, but it is possible through right
Yeah.
action.
And it's that idea that if you had no memory, if you had no memory of the past at all, and you were at this moment given the opportunity, like you woke up and you'd forgotten everything that ever happened to you, so you had no memories at all, and you saw certain types of behaviors and actions coming to the fore and attempting to act themselves out, would you still choose those behaviors? So, like for example, this anger we've been discussing, if you had no memory or no attachment to it from the past and from your past actions, if it came to the fore in a moment and you had the opportunity to choose love and acceptance or to choose anger and frustration, and what one would you want to choose in this moment? And I think most people would want to actually choose, if they weren't attached to the story that they've created around the negative ways of being and the attachments they've got to those, they actually would want to transform and would want to change.
Yeah, so the past is really a prison. The past really imprisons us. It's like it gives us this idea that we cannot act in any other way than the way we've been acting all those years. And that's an illusion. That's not true. The past,
No,
we can break out of that prison just by making right actions in the present moment and by changing your fate by an unchanging will. And that's a very, very wise, beautiful saying.
yeah. And I think as well is that when you start to see that it's simply a mechanical process, because before that, we often tend to have some sort of romantic notion of who we are, that I'm some sort of particular unique being, which I am, of course, but that is made up of some particular combination of different qualities, that like I'm a little bit easily frustrated here, and I'm a little bit, I have this quality in this area of my life and this quality in that area of my life. And we mistake those particular habitual ways of being with who we are. But fundamentally, we're something so different than our thoughts and our behaviors. We're something so much beyond those. And Sri Aurobindo has this really beautiful picture that he creates, this analogy that he uses of what the being is actually like, the true nature of our being. And so there's this idea in Indian spiritual thought of Prakriti and the Purusha. So the Purusha is the embodied being in the world, and the Prakriti is the energies or the forces that are acting out creation.
I've
And so
also heard it described as the Purusha being the silent witness. It is
yeah,
witnessing everything.
so there's two forms of the Purusha. So his analogy is that you are like a being, like a bird in a tree. And so the tree is Mother Nature. So the tree is the Prakriti. So it's the divine Shakti. And so Mother Nature is full of these forces acting out their nature. So she is full of the worms going about doing worm things, of trees going about being trees, of whales going about being whales, of humans acting out being human. And so there's this tremendous amount of energy and force that's acting itself out in this infinite number of a variety of forms. And then the Purusha is the individual. And so we see ourselves or experience ourselves as a bird on the tree. And so we're on Mother Nature, we're a bird. And at some point, we're sitting there on the branch and we're eating the particular fruits on the tree, and we're feeling the wind blowing, we're looking around, and we think, wow, this is me. I am this amazing being in reality, and I'm seeing and experiencing all. And we've identified ourselves with that part of our being that is manifest and experiencing reality. But Sri Aurobindo says at some point, though, we look up and we see another bird, and the other bird is much higher up on the tree. And the other bird is simply sitting there, and it is completely detached from the comings and goings of the experience of the reality. It is, in some ways, above and beyond what we're experiencing. So we're caught up in the experiences, the moments, the tastes, the sensations, the reactions. But there is another version of ourselves that is in some ways, that is there on the tree, but it is not captured by the tree. It is not being pulled down and caught by all of the experiences. And
So
so
how
this
is the first bird captured by the tree? I don't get it still.
so the Purusha that is living in the world is identifying itself with all of the experiences it's having. It's thinking that is what I am. I am the taste of this berry. I am the feeling of the wind in my under my
But isn't
wing.
that a wonderful experience, though, to feel those things and to really experience them?
Yeah, but it's also a wrong identification that we can, and the thing is, we will spend countless centuries in that state. So we will spend countless lifetimes and countless moments where we're fully identified as being here and being the doer of the actions. But there's always a part of ourselves that is somehow beyond and above, and that's the true soul that we're talking about. So the soul is here in the world, but it's not of the world. It's not ever caught by the world. So the soul is never caught by your anger. The soul is never caught by your lust or your greed. It's never
There's a
caught by.
famous saying in the Bhagavad Gita that the weapons cannot cleave the soul, fire cannot burn the soul, wind cannot dry the soul, and water cannot drench the soul. That's I think it's alluding to what you just said. I just
Yeah,
wanted to throw that out and to just impress everybody with my
that was
deep
very,
spiritual
that's a
knowledge.
beautiful and very poignant and poetic
Thank you.
version of what I'm
Thank you.
saying. But so there's this idea that at some point we will start to glimpse up, and we'll start to glimpse inside us, and we'll start to see that there is some part of our being that it seems to be completely unperturbed by the comings and goings of the fortunes and the failures of our day-to-day life.
It's the yogi bird that's on a few branches higher.
Exactly. And so it's here in the world, but it's not captured by the world. And I think that is the state that very many of us would love to be in, where we're in the world, but we're not so caught by the world. Because
And
it,
then you can still taste the fruit and still
yeah,
feel the wind and enjoy these things, but you're not attached to them. You're not identified by them or with
yeah.
them.
And so that's the thing. It's this wrong identification that we are these experiences that we're having. Whereas in reality, we're something far transcendent. We're something far more vast and beautiful that is here having this experience, but we're not limited by the experiences that we're having.
Yeah. Agreed. And so when we circle back to fate versus free will, I think that's an interesting um, paradox or an interesting how do you say that? Two things that are opposition.
Yes, and so we could call that it's a paradoxical. It's an apparent paradox
Yeah.
because when we look at the world from the point of view of how we're normally experiencing it, we are in some ways trapped. We're entrapped by the responses that we make to the stimulus and the thought waves that
And
come
we
in.
can call this fate. Can we not?
Yeah, and so there's many philosophers or neuroscientists out there at the moment who are getting deeper and deeper into the weeds of how the brain functions. And so if we believe that our mind is simply the functioning of the physical brain, we're going to think, well, we have no free will because the brain, what we call mind and consciousness, is simply the firing of these neurons.
And then people have researched that before you make a decision, it's already registered in your brain. Your brain has made the decision before you become conscious of it. That is also a very powerful argument for the fact that there's no such thing as free will. I'm just throwing that out there just to
Yeah,
spice it
but
up.
this is the argument, but this is not um, taking into account this deeper version of how the mind operates. So if we use the mind as being like a surface of it as being the surface structure on which consciousness appears. So it's our thoughts, it's our experiences, it's all of the things that we would commonly associate with being conscious. And then the question is, where are these things originating? And so if you're a materialist, you'll say, well, obviously they're coming just purely from the physical functioning of the brain. The spiritual teachers will say, no, that's not the right level of analysis because you have the physical mind, but you also have the vital, you have the physical body, and then you have this whole level of the inconscient, everything that in your subconscious. And
Maybe
so,
just a word about the vital. The vital is the area just below the navel where the life forces operate, the emotions operate, and it's a very common concept in Indian spiritual philosophy. It's one of the parts of our being, one of the elements that we are made up of. So we have
yeah,
mind,
and
body, vital, heart, and soul.
exactly. And the vital is really the home of the six forces. And it's the part of our being that's most closely associated with the acting out of the prakriti, of Mother Nature's forces. Because
Sex,
obviously,
but also aggression and power. Sex,
Yes. So,
power, and money.
yeah. So
Sorry.
all of those things are the most basic forces in creation, because they're the things that forces that are needed for creation to continue. So
Yeah.
for us to continue living, we need to procreate, we need to stay alive. So we need, force and aggression and power, and we have this strong urge to procreate. So all of these forces are these very ancient, primordial, mechanical forces that are operating in through us. And then we also have the subconscious, or the unconscious part of our being, which we never experience. And that
I
is,
would say don't go there. Don't
that,
go there, people.
yeah, exactly. And
Nothing
at
there.
one point in the 1800s, some of the psychoanalysts, so Freud and Jung, really started to delve down into this region, because they started to realize there's all these sub personalities that seem to be existing within us. And the thing is, if you want to bring light down into that part of the being, that is the very last part of your being that you're going to illumine. So going
That you're
there,
going to? That you're going to?
that you're going to illumine. So that's the
Okay.
very final stage of your illumining of the being, because this is the lowest part of your being that's most closely associated with the physical. And so first of all, we need to illumine our own mind, like what we associate with the physical mind. We need to illumine that level. Then we're going to bring the illumination and light down into our vital. And then finally, it's going to come into our physical. So it just seems to be invoking a whole world of trouble to think you'd go the other way around, to think, oh, start down in the physical, clean
Yeah.
up that whole area, and then I'll move my way up. It just seems that that would be the last place that this whole higher light,
I
because,
would say that sounds like a lot like putting the cart before the horse.
yeah, exactly. And so those are the lower levels from which thoughts can appear into our minds. So maybe a thought that appears in our consciousness has come purely from the mind itself. And so it may be something, rational and reasonable. But as we move further down, it becomes less and less rational and reasonable. So the types of thoughts that come from your vital are more basic and physical impulses towards certain things. And then when you really get down into the physical, it becomes very obscure and very murky
Muddy.
world.
Muddy and murky.
And so that's the lower part of our being. But we've got to understand that everything that the mind or the consciousness is a neutral space. And the awareness that appears in our consciousness can also come from the higher parts of our being. So as well as the subconscious, we have the superconscious, we have the supermental, or the above mental consciousness. And so this is the realm of where thoughts and awareness from the heart and the soul will come down and appear in our mind. And this is for me one part of
That's
our
a
being.
cool place to hang out.
Yeah, this is a part of our being that no one ever discusses. We are all, yes, the whole unconscious. That's a
Yeah.
really interesting place to go and like spend some time. I'm like, holy moly, people! Like, you probably want to start by bringing something down from above, and put the force coming down from the highest possible parts of our being, and bring that more illumined consciousness down into our mind, rather than allowing all of this muck and dirt and obscurity to appear in our mind. Why don't
Yeah,
we
so
try and bring down
there
something?
will be people who say like, but what do we do then with that mud and murk? And I would say by illumining yourself with the light that comes from above, the lower parts are also automatically illumined as well. Wouldn't you agree? That
Yeah,
happens simultaneously with the
and
illumination. You don't have to worry about that dark part. It will be transformed and illumined by taking down hanging out more in the supra-conscious levels.
yeah, and Krishnamurti talks a lot about. He's got the lovely analogy he uses of the electrician. It's if you want to transform the darkness inside you, you don't go down there in the dark and stumble around and trip over things and find a few dead bodies and get yourself in all sorts of trouble. What you would do if you were wise, you would bring an electrician and you would set up a light bulb, and you would, by flicking on that light, bringing the light into the darkness, immediately it begins to illumine that part of your being. And so going down there and stumbling around in the dark is not the right approach. The right approach is to spend as much time as you can in your highest possible states of awareness. And when you're in your best possible states of consciousness, you will start to find that these illumined, inspiring, intuitive thoughts all start to appear within you, because in the higher realms of the mind, that's the home of the intuitive mind. It's the home of the super mind, which is the consciousness that is beyond mind and that knows all and connects you with all knowledge and wisdom. And so Sri Aurobindo, his great mission was to attempt to bring the supermind down into the earth consciousness, which had never really happened before. So it was something really unparalleled. And he was talking about trying to bring that transformation right down into the cells of the physical body. So he was attempting a completely wholesale transformation of matter into divine matter,
And
which I think is really,
he eventually did that with his own body. And so he realized he had to leave his body. He basically had to leave the body in order for the light to descend. So when he passed away, when he left his body, as we say, the body apparently glowed with a supermental light for, I think it was several days. And people saw the light descending. Some people saw the light actually,
yeah.
like, physically descending, the supermental light into his physical body.
And so if you're looking for a task to really, or a mission to really devote your life to, if you really are looking for something that is going to be the highest possible aim for you in your life, I mean,
Gardening.
you could really do no worse, I think, than to really try and bring down your own highest consciousness and bring it into your waking state here on earth. Because
Yeah.
more than anything that you could offer to the world, if you could really capture your highest states of consciousness and really learn to live in those on a regular basis, and then really learn to operate and manifest those higher states of consciousness in your day-to-day life, that would do more than anything else you could do to transform the face of the world. And so for me, it's a really inspiring understanding that I'm not just these mechanical processes that are acting out fear and lust and greed. And when I become aware of that, it's much easier for me to not identify with those things anymore. And that is the beginning of the transformation of them, because when I think that that's who I am and how could I be anything different, I'm not even inspired to try to transform my nature. But when I start to realize, oh, these are simply some processes that are ancient and exist within me, but they're not who I am, and I can choose not to identify with them. And instead, I can put all my time and energy into identifying with these higher divine parts of my being. Then my life becomes radically different and more inspiring in so many ways.
Amen. Amen to that. And so, what would you say to the argument that there's no such thing as free will because everything is already predetermined by the brain? We're just acting out these impulses that we have.
Yeah. So if we're only operating from the lower parts of our being, so from the physical mind, from the vital, from the physical body, from the unconscious, we are always going to be trapped by these particular behaviors. And the only way to free ourselves from this and to give ourselves real free will is to find something that transcends that reality. And so this is really connecting with the higher parts of our being and really finding an inner will that is unshakable and unchangeable. And so as we've said, Sri Aurobindo said, fate can be changed by an unchanging will. And the mind is not the home of an unchanging world. The mind will 1 minute be inspired by this idea, and the next minute will tell you, well, look at you last week, you didn't get up on time, and you got angry and you got jealous and you got frustrated. Who are you to think that you could find some divine consciousness within you? So the mind is not the place you will find that unchanging world, but that unchanging will exists in those higher states of being within you. So it exists within your heart, it exists within your soul. So it exists within that bird, that soul bird that's unperturbed by the comings and goings of the world. That's the part of you that you need to connect with. And from there, you will begin to find this will that when those patterns and those mechanical ways of being start to try and crank up and try and act out some basic form of behavior, you will have the will to say, not on my watch. And you'll say, no, I'm choosing to act out a different form of behavior, a different type of behavior. And so it's a daily practice and it's a daily battle against the lower parts of your being. But when you're identified with the right part of your being, with the higher part of your being, it can be completely successful.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. I've also heard the concept of free will being explained in a very elegant way by Jordan Peterson, and I
Hmm.
just wanted to reiterate what he said about that. I thought it was so beautifully explained, and because sometimes it appears that in our life we have made certain choices, and those choices they determine for a large part how our day-to-day life is going, and we can't just escape that. So we have our work, we have our job, and if you're a radical exponent of free will, you could just say, "Oh, I'm deciding not to go to my job today, or I'll just, not pay my rent this month." But there are certain things we've decided to do, which make us, let's say, a little bit imprisoned. It's not like we have full freedom, right? There are certain things we've decided, and that determines our life. And you could argue in that way that there's very limited free will because we have these certain paths that we walk down. And the way he explained this was by, let's say, free will versus determinism, that everything is determined. And when you make, like, say, when you make a choice as a piano player to play this beautiful piano piece by, let's say, Chopin, this wonderful piece on the piano, and you start to practice, you start to study, and you start to learn the piece, and your fingers are finding the right notes for it, and it takes some time, several weeks, several months, and at some point you can play the piece without even looking at the music. You've mastered it. And then you give your recital, and you could say, on the day of your recital, on the moment when you're playing the notes, there is no free will. You don't even have to think. Your fingers are automatically, they're kind of locked into the piece. And so you could say, if you look at the very minutiae of that action, you can see these fingers are acting out a program that there's no more free will. They've completely locked into what kind of music they have to play. But then if you start zooming out, you go back to the moment that you decided to play that piece. That is the moment when free will entered. And so your free will is that decision that you made months earlier when you wanted to play that piece by Chopin. And then that free will plays itself out through the weeks and months of practice to the actual piano recital. And then everything is locked in. But that locked inness, that kind of like state of being locked in, is a result of that choice that you made much earlier. And I think that's such a beautiful analogy for how free will works in our life, because we can say our soul has made these decisions to have this particular incarnation, to have this life with these parents, with these circumstances, and the stage is set. And you can say, oh, well, I'm born into the circumstances. What can I do? But you could say, no, this is a result of the actions that you've taken in your previous life, or the decisions that you've taken from your soul. And there was a moment when you decided consciously to enter into this game of life, into this manifestation. And that is the moment that that you used your free will. And of course, that had consequences that played out in the long term of all these things that kind of came together to make these choices and to follow these choices to their end.
Yeah, that is completely accurate, I think. And the reason it's accurate is because I think free will and transformation happen over a long period of time. So what you can do in any one particular moment is always going to be limited by the overarching goals or aims that you're trying to achieve. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the thing, that people who argue against free will are often caught too much in looking into the minutiae in one particular moment. They'll say, oh, well, in this particular moment, you've got this particular stimulus coming in and you've got this particular firing of neurons and you're acting in this particular way. So this shows you're completely trapped. But over a long period of time where you are aspiring towards something better or more ideal in your life, you are making looking at things in a much more zoomed out perspective. It's not about winning one particular moment or one particular battle. It's instead making a whole bunch of conscious choices over a very long period of time that begins to reprogram and free you from the way that you were actually imprisoned by your own weaknesses and your own problems.
Yeah, and I have to think of the analogy of the boat that you made about the past, and we often feel that we are trapped by our past and that our past is dictating our present. But
Yeah.
then if you look at a boat and you look at the ripples that the boat makes in its wake, you could say, like, well, if you believe in the idea that the past is dictating the present, then it's the idea that the ripples are pushing the boat forward. But it's actually the opposite way. The ripples are created by the movements of the boat in the present.
Mm.
So that's the analogy that you have to make actions now to create your past, right?
Yes.
So it's like it's you're not trapped by your past. You can decide here and now to live a different life, to do different actions, to live a more spiritually wholesome life, and to make right actions, hopefully inspired by your deepest, truest nature. And by that way, you also create a different past. So in a year's time, you will look back and see, wow, I've become so much happier, healthier, more. I've made so much more healthy choices. And that's really how I think, should look at the past, not as a prison, but as a it's dust. It's like it's in the past. It didn't bring you what you wanted. You can just safely ignore it. I mean, take the nice things from your past with you, the beautiful memories, the wonderful experiences you had, but all the negative stuff, just ignore it. Just create a better past by doing something useful and healthy in your present.
Yeah, it's to remember that it's a story that is still being written. And that's the thing. There's no point to go back and try and rewrite the story because those pages and those chapters are already written. But instead, understanding and accepting that at every moment you are the author of the story of your life. And so the choices I'm making now and the actions I'm taking will ripple backwards as my past. They'll be recorded as the actions I took. And they will appear in my past. And so yeah, I totally agree. So one final thing I really want to touch on as well, because we're talking about nature of mind, is that we've talked a lot about the negative and the lower parts of our being and how they impact the thoughts and our experience of consciousness. But we haven't really touched on the higher parts of our being. And so I've got one really beautiful story that I could tell. But we could talk a little bit first about people who've lived here on Earth, much as we have, but their experience of consciousness and their experience of mind has been radically different than the type of stories we're telling. So when I think of someone like Nikolai Tesla or Mozart or um, all sorts of creative types, visionary types, their experience, like Nikolai Tesla is a good example. He was one of perhaps the world's greatest inventor. And he would often talk about how his inventions came to him as almost like a set of blueprints that appeared in his consciousness. So it's like a blueprint of some type of machine or device would appear in his mind. And he would frantically try and scribble it down as quickly as he could before the next one appeared, before the next amazing creation appeared in his consciousness. And so I don't think that he had a different type of physical brain than other people do. It's nothing to do with that. But it's instead, there was a state of consciousness that he was connected with, which we could call the supermind or the overmind or the illumined mind or the intuitive mind, wherever these visions were coming from. But it's the same with many great artists that they'll see or like almost the composition will come to them fully realized and they'll simply be trying to jot it down frantically before it disappears. So I think there is something that we're not tapping into when we're only identified with the lower parts of our being and dealing with these mechanical processes. We're missing out on this whole beautiful world of inspiration and creativity. And Sri Chinmoy was an amazing example because he was someone whose access to the worlds of creativity was completely open and free. And so his ability to write, to create music, to do paintings, to do works of art was completely unlimited by the need for inspiration that normal creative people have. That's this need for a moment to strike. He had a free access to this higher world from which all of this creativity would pour down. And we have a friend in our spiritual community who publicly shared this amazing story. And so she was when she came along and started to learn to meditate, she was actually studying for her PhD. And so, as people know, a PhD program or doctorate program is a very long and involved process. And normally it might be 3 or 4 years of science. And she was doing science, hard sciences of some description. And so she was doing a whole bunch of experiments. And so for many, many years, you're working on your experiments to get all your data. And then finally, perhaps in the last year of your thesis, you'll sit down and actually write it all out. And so it might take you a year, it might take you 18 months to write all of this down. And it's one of the great struggles of any academic, because it's really the highest height of the academic world. You go through kindergarten and primary school and high school, and then you go through your undergraduate degree and your master's. And then finally, this is really the zenith height. And so they do make it really hard to achieve this. And with a few years to go in her PhD program, she'd started practicing meditation with Sri Chinmoy. And so she was really inspired and enjoying the process and felt as though it was making her a better scientist. And she was getting towards the end of the experimental phase of her PhD. And at the same time, there was Sri Chinmoy's birthday celebration was happening in New York City. And she'd been to New York a few times, and she'd really valued the experience of spending time with a real spiritual teacher. And she'd got so much from it that she was really committed to, this is what I want to do. I want to go and be there and have this meditative experience and share time with this spiritual community. And so with your PhD, you always have a supervisor. And so the supervisor is the person whose goal is to keep you on track. And so often they can be quite troublesome for many people doing their PhD, because they'll have their own ideas about how your PhD should look and how you should go about things. And so our friend, she had a scholarship, and that was paying for her to be able to do her PhD. And when she came to her supervisor and said, okay, I'm at the point now where I've nearly finished or have finished all of the practical work, and she felt like she had now several months to write up her thesis, which, would have taken her all that time. And she said, I'm just going to take a couple of weeks off to go to the spiritual celebration in New York and practice meditation. And her supervisor said to her, no, if you do that, we will cancel your scholarship and you will no longer have access to an office to do your work from. And she was planning on leaving in 1 week's time. And so he felt as though
Why did he say that? Why did he say that?
So he wanted to use his power over her. He wanted to say, look, I don't think you're taking your studies seriously enough. You need to really focus. And this is the most important thing, is your PhD. But she was at a point where she'd started to see, no, there's something actually more important in my life than just my PhD. My spiritual experiences and my spiritual practice to me is actually now much more important than simply my studies and this PhD that I'm working towards. So she had approximately 7 days from when he told her this until she was flying out to New York. So he felt, I've really caught her, because she can't survive without the scholarship. She needs the scholarship. And she also had a job coming up that she needed to finish the PhD for. And so he really felt he had backed her into a corner, so that she was going to have to cancel her trip to New York. And I think that she totally felt that she was in the same situation. It's like, okay, I have 1 week. There's no possible way that I can actually finish my PhD in time. And then something really interesting happened. And this for me is the access to the intuitive mind, the higher mind, the illumined mind.
But if I may butt in, I know this story as well, but didn't she start praying really intensely at that time?
So I think so. So I think whenever you find yourself in a situation like this where you're really backed into a corner, that's really, human beings, we're not great at praying, but when we find ourselves in a near-death situation or something really serious happens, even the most atheistic person starts calling on any gods, any higher forces, any beings that they can think of to please come and help us. And so that is a very natural response. And so I think that she started to invoke and call on some deeper part of her being, or some higher, more illumined part. And then suddenly she was hit with, I think she describes it as like a fire of inspiration. And she just sat down and started writing. And so she just started writing like crazy. And for 4 days and 4 nights without any sleep, because this is a process that would normally take months and months, if not years, to write out your thesis. And she was just filled with this unbelievable divine inspiration. And so, as I said, sleeplessly for 4 days and 4 nights, she wrote, and this information just poured out of her. And she was finding graphs and she was finding information that she needed. And she was making connections that, even for her, when she looked back on it afterwards, and like completely blew her mind that she saw these connections and saw these insights. And so I think after 4 days of frantic, non-stop, divinely inspired work, suddenly in front of her, she had an entirely completed thesis, which her supervisor, there was no way that he would have imagined that there was any chance or any possibility for this to have occurred, unless we believe in the power of the divine. Like, this is really a great example of the divine's ability to transform our fate with an unchanging will. And so she ended up submitting it. And then many months later, when she had to defend it, and she read through it and looked at her own writing, she herself was blown away by what she created, because she saw the hand of the illumined, the divine, the inspired part of her being had really used her as an instrument and put together this wondrous piece of work that was universally recognized by the other professors and the people reviewing it as a really outstanding piece of work. And little did they know, I think, that she did it in 4 days of divine inspiration.
Can we reveal the name of this person? Because we have a community that will recognize, because she has written it online.
Yeah, she has. So this is our friend Toshila Elliott. And so you can find her right up above. But I think for me, it was so inspiring to read that. And I think it's just such an amazing example of the true nature of mind. If we could truly understand who we truly are and what our true capacities we have, and what we could truly do in the world, if we could allow ourselves to operate and access these parts of our being. And that's the thing, people often talk about, oh, we only use such and such percentage of our brain. It's like, that's not even the worst of it, because how much of our brain we use is, in some ways a little bit beside the point. But we use so little, we only use such a fraction of the true potential of our being. If we look at the totality of our spiritual and higher capacities to operate and the types of capacities that we truly have access to, we're not even scratching the surface of 1% of our true capacity that we're using.
Yeah. That's a great hopeful message for the future, because we will, I think, start unlocking these potentials inside ourselves. Definitely with spirituality becoming more mainstream, but meditation becoming more mainstream. This is going to be a wonderful future that we have ahead of us.
Yeah, I would love to see in 10,000 years how human beings are living their lives here on Earth, and the type of states of consciousness and the types of abilities and capacities that are considered unusual now, which will be completely commonplace at that point.
Exactly. We'll keep you posted. We'll be there in 10,000 years. And we have to end it here, because I have a meditation coming up in our spiritual center, which I have to go to now. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Vajin from Costa Rica. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Cheers. All the best.